two quick things. One is to remind all of us about human development approach, what it is. It's essentially something that is sustained by two pillars or two core ideas. One is the idea that welfare, human welfare, is determined by more than income, important as income is for many things in life, but there are many other aspects of life that determine people's welfare and well-being. And that was the inspiration behind the Human Development Index, in which income was complemented by other aspects that are important for people's life. So this is the first key idea. But the second key idea is that people's capabilities are determined also by their agency, the ability to hold values and make commitments to things that go beyond advancing their own welfare and well-being. So these two ideas are central to the notion of human development and human development approach. So this is the first point I wanted to make. And secondly, I wanted to put into context the work that we're currently doing on the 2021-2022 Human Development Report, because it builds and in a way, it's the culmination of a trilogy of reports that started with the 2019 Human Development Report, which focused on inequalities in human development, and the 2020 Human Development Report, the second step in this trilogy, which looked at human development in the context of the new planetary reality, is sometimes described as the Anthropocene. And currently, we're trying to see how these two aspects intersect with one another, how processes of dangerous planetary change manifested in climate change, biodiversity loss, zoonotic diseases, and many of the hazards we confront is forcing all of us to think about the transition into a different way of organizing our economies and our societies. All of this is engendering a context of uncertainty that we are all living through quite acutely at the moment, and the context of uncertainty that overlaps with inequalities in human development and risks in many cases exacerbating many of them. So that's the program for the current effort that we are undertaking. We are basically starting at the moment, so we are very much looking for guidance on some initial hypotheses that we're putting forward and seeking your feedback and advice on how to take this inquiry forward. So thank you again, Grace. Thank you, everyone. Very much looking forward to the discussion and learning from all of you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Indeed, it is such a pleasure for the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation to collaborate with Human Development Report Office. This is the third year in a row, and every year we bring together think tanks and thought leaders from the Global South to contribute to this very important analysis. So first of all, welcome you all to today's consultation. Actually, it is critical, we all know, that HDR as a flagship report that shapes development thinking, discourses, and inspire policies, reflect evidence, reality, analysis, and perspectives from the Global South. We're so glad that the South-South Global Thinkers Initiative, this global coalition of think tanks on South-South cooperation, jointly supported with UNDP, is able to serve as such a participatory platform for consulting views and ideas from think tanks, scholars, thought leaders from the developing world. This think tank initiative is already a very active research community after 5 years working together. They share strong commitment to horizontally sharing with each other insights and knowledge. While celebrating diversity of views, this community never fails to bring about evidences and recognize the value of cooperation especially South-South and triangular cooperation in addressing development challenges the world is facing. If we say uncertainty has become the norm today, one thing remains certain. As we live and work in a more and more interconnected manner, facing compounded crises that know no borders, cooperation remains the key to unlock the door to the future we truly want and value. Nothing can be done without cooperation between countries, communities, and peoples. South-South cooperation is indeed built on such a strong belief in solidarity and in mutual support to achieve common goals of the developing countries towards a sustainable future for the world. We all live in this COVID-19 pandemic. It hit amid high inequality and low social mobility in many developing countries. It continues to expose systematic weaknesses and structural issues, and exacerbated all facets of inequalities, whether it relates to income, gender, ethnicity, people living with disabilities, or digital divide during this pandemic. Yet the response to the pandemic again demonstrated the importance of overcoming such challenges through cooperation. The solidarity underpinning South-South cooperation enabled many developing countries, and especially least developed countries, to obtain urgently needed medications, vaccines, and medical supplies from their southern partners during the pandemic. In addressing the glaring gap of vaccine equity, more recently, China has pledged 1 billion vaccine doses to Africa, including vaccine production cooperation with several developing countries, which is applaudable, as such cooperation is fundamental for countries to enhance productive capacity, self-reliance, and integration of global value chain. Also, according to UNICEF, we know India is the world's 4th largest donor of COVID vaccines, including donated doses delivered bilaterally or through COVAX. We hope to see, and we are seeing, such cooperation and mutual support among developing countries keep increasing. Of course, more efforts are needed. The pandemic also gave the world the opportunity to accelerate digital transformation. At the same time, the pandemic has further shown digital inequalities, and the divide is huge. I don't need to repeat those numbers, but especially digitalization nowadays has not only become an opportunity to recover, it has become a necessity to survive, a basic enabler for human rights. South-South cooperation in digital era can bring impactful changes if it focuses on enhancing digital connectivity, harmonizing policies and regulations for cross-border e-commerce, for example, and support each other in enhancing skills and capacity for digital future. The interconnectedness of the crisis that defined the era of the Anthropocene, let me use the human development term, climate change, biodiversity loss, the overshoot of planetary boundaries, and most recently this pandemic, sound the alarm that there is a dire need for dramatic change in how human lives, interacts with one another, and treats the ecosystem. Perspectives and voices from the Global South can provide critical reflections on human-nature relations and offer collective solutions. This can take the form of South-South cooperation among neighboring countries live around mountains, forests, rivers, lakes, take collective measures to safeguarding natural resources that they share. It also can take the form of regional economic integration and common regional and sub-regional strategies in promoting sustainable financing and alignment of cross-border investment with SDGs. As the upcoming HDR intends to draw from and extend the discussions on the last 2 editions on inequality and human development of the Anthropocene, This consultation, I think, really comes at a very opportune time to ensure the report reflects the reality of the Global South, benefit from the wisdom from the Global South yet again, and reflect on South-South cooperation as a promising mechanism in addressing challenges of inequality and uncertainty that are cross-border in nature. I thank you for the ideas you already shared through this online e-discussion during the past months, which is very rich, and I already read all of them, and I also clicked the likes, and thank you very much. And I look forward to a very productive and very insightful discussion today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro and Grace. So now we're gonna move on to our presentation and welcome and scene setting by Heriberto Tapia, who's the Research and Strategic Partnership Advisor at the Human Development Report Office. So Heriberto, you have the floor. You should be able to share your screen.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you in particular to our colleagues, to Grace and the colleagues in the South-South Cooperation Office for making this possible again, and to all the participants. We are very, this is a very important part of the process of writing the report. I'm trying to share my screen. Here it is. So probably you can see it now.
Yes.
So, as I was saying, this is a very central part of the process of writing the report. Here we want to start a conversation and hopefully keep it going to have relationship, partnership with you. And the word start is important in this session because we are just starting with the report, as Pedro mentioned. We want your input, your reflections going forward. So also to emphasize that this is part of a relatively broad architecture of consultation. So we are consulting based on regional meetings and also based on thematic meetings. But for us, this this consultation with Southern thinkers, global thinkers. I'm sorry. Yes. Is crucial because one of the problems we have faced over the last few years is that for us it's relatively easy to engage with some leading centers from the north, but we really want to invest more in our relationship with people working from the south. So it's a little bit harder. So this is a very important step for us. So now I'm gonna go very quickly over some of the elements of the next report. The working title we have is Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, Shaping Our Future in a World in Transformation. So the basic elements that we are in a new context with uncertain times, and this has a lot to do with a new planetary reality. So the Anthropocene, so this is the geological, some scientists say this is a new geological epoch. Some others just say it's an event. But this is a context, a new reality where humans are driving an unprecedented transformation on the planet. So here you see how temperatures are increasing, and this is already causing several transformations in the planet that are being experienced by people. So what's going to happen next is very uncertain because we are just learning the nature of these effects, and therefore what we are learning is that these effects depend not only on the geophysical processes that are driving temperatures up and how temperatures might be causing changes in the planet, but also this is the result of the interaction between social imbalances and what happens with the planet. So there are also some tipping points that might accelerate changes, and therefore this brings a scenario that where really there are certain things that are risks that for which we can estimate probabilities, but there are other events that we are not even sure that they might happen or not. Some things we cannot even imagine, and therefore we cannot associate probability to them. Also, this is a scenario with compounding risk, where we not only have what is happening with the planet, but also we have some trends in terms of the development of new technologies, for instance, that is following its own dynamic, and therefore the interconnection is something that is particularly relevant to understand this process. This is just to give you a sense of also another of the sources of uncertainty is what is our reaction. So what are the policies that these changes are triggering in our societies? And one of them has to do with the transformation of our energy matrix. So the world is expected to transition toward green energies, but this process is gonna produce some social tensions. So the way we do this is going to affect also the outcome. It's going to affect the willingness of people to accept it. It's going to affect the distribution of resources in the planet. And there are many options open. And again, this is a big source of uncertainty going forward. Another source of uncertainty is the parallel process of technological change. Here you see how the global data traffic is expected to grow very rapidly. Now it's large. In the next few years, it's going to be several times higher. And this certainly brings a new scenario. So this is a look at the transformation from the point of view of storage. So you can see how the analog storage is now way less than 1%, and the digital storage is what is dominating. This is just to give a sense of how the digital world is becoming central, and this is having many implications for social interaction, including public deliberations. So how do we deal with a process in which we agree on things in an environment of abundant information, some of it false information, some of it generated by algorithms. So this is something that we need to factor in. And also the implications of this transformation from the environment, both in terms of the contributions that this transformation can make in order to improve the energy matrix, let's say, but also because of the consequences for the environment of some of the digital transformation, let's say, in terms of higher consumption of energy. Now, the key question is how to respond. So what's going to happen with action and generally speaking, our institution in uncertain times? Because we observe that the current architecture of institutions broadly defined is not fit for purpose for these times. We see that they have, in many cases, failed to fulfill their roles, reducing uncertainty, which is precisely one of the ends of institution. And in some cases, the the institutions, the failures of institutions are driving uncertainty. So in order to approach this, this question, we propose to expand the way we think about the decision-making process. So currently, a lot of the discussion when we think about what are the actions that we have to take is based on a rational choice paradigm, where emotions and desires are out of the picture. In this report, we will try to expand our view of decision-making, understanding that when beliefs are changing, which in a process of transformations, so what happens with emotions and desire play a very important role. We see this as a very important element because there are, for policy making, because there are other players that are already taking advantage of this wider view. We see what's happening in marketing. We see it in the way in which certain political leaders precisely exploit what is happening with emotions and desires in order to promote their agenda. So it's fundamental that we can also see things through this wider lens. And also to understand that this process takes place within a broader context. So there is a broader social context with social norms, for instance, that play a fundamental role, but also a context of cultural models. So there are, for instance, certain narratives in the way we organize our societies that can condition the way we make decisions. So the ideal of the American dream, for instance, in the US is one model of a narrative that a cultural repertoire that determines the way people react. What happens with the cosmovision of indigenous group is another set of examples. So it is important to widen the scope, again, how decisions are made by individuals, what's happening with the social context, and also the set of cultural repertoire. So, and this matrix shows the interaction of, so the columns go how we have different models from the relatively restricted rational choice model to a model that includes emotions, and then a model that includes the context, the social context of the cultural models, and how this interacts with the way decisions are made at the individual level, and these are the roles, also the collective determinants, and also the scope of intervention. And you see how, I don't have time to go over this, but how as we expand our models towards the right, then we gain understanding and in terms of what are the key determinants, and also we gain understanding about what are the potential elements that can be part of action broadly defined. So to sum up, so this report will try to answer the question of how to get better institutions to face this new reality, institutions that are able to adapt and transform, and also how this new context is in this new context we can have a new generation, an understanding about what are the actions that people can take, that we can take not only in the space of, let's say, government, but also in the or market, but also in the space of civil society. So, for instance, we plan to analyze what happens, what is the role of social movements and other community initiatives. So I'm gonna stop here. We look forward to your reactions or your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Heriberto, for that presentation. So now I'm gonna open the floor for anyone who likes to participate. I think we'll have first 2 participations of people that have to leave. So if Justin Gifulin, if you are online and you want to speak first. And also I know, yeah.
Carolina, maybe go to the next speaker.
Okay.
The next speaker. Thank you.
I know also Professor Nunguna, you had to go early. So if you want to start.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And that was quite a brilliant presentation. Brings so many things together. But it's also coming at a time when we have to rethink and maybe strategy. And you know, when I've been a little bit concerned whenever we talk about human capital development in Africa, and even when we talk about economic transformation, and even when people also talk about structural transformation, and then you wonder why it hasn't worked. But because we are changing times and there are new challenges that we have to rethink. I was very happy that even when the summing up was fantastic because you focus on the role of institutions. And for me, this is where the institutional failure has actually conditioned policy failure in a very difficult way, especially in the South, especially in the African region. And I do believe that as we go along, we have to start thinking about how to re-engineer institutions so that they can actually play their rightful role. I do believe there are 2 important roles that are played by institutions. One of them is to define the rules of the game, or what we call the legal framework. And the other one is actually to define the appropriate incentives. And obviously, you know that when you have a combination of appropriate incentives and the rules of the game are adhered, then you encourage prudent behavior in the marketplace. And that is, for us, very, very important, that you can rely on institutions to show the way. Anyway, having come to that, let me talk about also where are we now in the COVID, in the pandemic. We are managing the pandemic, especially for us in the African Economic Research Consortium. When we build capacity, we are starting to rethink. For example, we are starting to rethink about new issues. For example, we had just finished a study on health financing in Africa, and then the COVID hit. Then we had to go back, and we were told to go back to the drawing board because we now have to come up with a new should I say, study and policy proposals for academic infrastructure and technology of managing the COVID. So it means that they are not normal times. But here I want to deal with perhaps 3 main issues that I feel very important. No, 4 main issues, because I think there was also the digital space that was announced. First, we have to rethink about human capital development in Africa now, and especially in the global South, because it has been devoured by the pandemic. And we have to reactivate it and see how are we going to protect the private investment in this way, through health, education, and even nutrition. That, for me, is a very important aspect of human capital development and human development that is we are going to work on. The second aspect is that we have to start thinking about how are we going to help markets, because it's only through markets that economic recovery, especially in low-income countries, can work. But markets are destroyed by institutions, and so markets don't perform their rightful role. And because essentially you find that it is in markets where economic trends are shared and distributed. But if you look at markets from a global, even from a global point of view, we have failed even to restructure the global value chain. So it means that downstream in terms of production cannot affect production. So it's an area that we need to think about. So when we talk about institution, we really think about how we're going to deal with it. The third point is that fiscal space has been devoured, and some countries are actually suffering from debt distress. So we have to rethink about domestic resource mobilization as a package of instruments that are going to deal with tax, in optimal tax instruments, as well as domestic resource mobilization through appropriate debt instruments. And finally, the digital space, the digital evolution, and this was mentioned. This is going to coordinate the future of economic activities in most of the countries. Of course, people have started talking about the 4th industrial revolution, and we can repackage it and see what has happened. In this region of Africa, we have succeeded using the digital space for financial services and financial inclusion, but we do believe that it can coordinate all the other sectors. So these are the new areas that are coming up, and we may need to bring them up. They can actually form a very major subject matter. I have seen even World Development Report on digital on the digital space or digital evolution. But most of it is, how does it coordinate our actions and policies in our own institutions, and how does it coordinate economic management and even the future human capital development? And that's going to be very, very important. To give you a practical example, for us, we even deal with researchers and also graduate programs in Africa. And since the COVID hit, we cannot bring students to one place to teach them, nor can we bring researchers. And we have taken the digital platform, and everything has gone on well. It has not been been disrupted. But we can't say that for other countries that could not afford that kind of wholesale kind of digital platform. So these are just examples of, in terms of the reality that is hitting us and how we have to think the future. Thank you very much for giving me this chance. I think this is a wonderful, I've listened to wonderful presentations and wonderful ideas.
Thank you so much for your comments. They're very useful for the work that we are doing, and we're gonna take this feedback into account. Now I would like to give the floor to Tassin Qureshi, who also has to go. So Tassin, if you want to speak, and I also encourage everyone, if you want to start raising your hands.
Thank you, Carolina. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. We have a scheduled network maintenance, so my intervention is going to be really quick, and then I have to unfortunately disconnect earlier. I'm Tassin Qureshi, researcher at SSC. We are a statistical, social, and economic research and training center for the 57 member states of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Compared to the other esteemed participants here today, I feel very green right now. I'm a newbie in this field. I've only been doing policy research for about 3 or 4 years now. What my take on the discussion that we have today is that obviously it's very necessary and it's very timely. We also cannot deny the role of technology and digitalization in not just human development, but also like recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, its aftermaths, and just to build back better. We all understand the reliance of developing countries, especially in the global South. And I'm speaking from my own institutional experience and research experience about the member states of the OIC, is that they're heavily reliant on technology and digitalization, but at the same time, they do not have the infrastructure, investment, or even the expertise and resources to have or to optimally utilize such resources. In response to the 3 discussion prompts that Ms. Navida sent to us earlier, I'd first like to stress on, like, when we talk about technology, and this is clear from the comments of the speakers before me, is we talk about it in, we can talk about institutions, we can talk about what's happening within the national boundaries, but what we should start addressing beforehand is the role that international tech companies, and especially, let's say, social media companies play in human development, especially in the global South. So I'm talking about, I'm referring to the very famous role of Facebook in, let's say, the Cambridge Analytica, I don't know what to call it, a scam or a fraud or a controversy, but also because in a very recent, I think, newspaper article from a whistleblower pointed out how companies like these do not have enough resources and capacity to actually counter misinformation in developing world, mostly because of language barriers and things like that. But this affects human development directly, because in countries, developing countries or low-income countries where literacy rates are very low, where the public sources of information are either monopolized or censored very heavily, then the role of news and the role of media is very important when it comes to human development. And this is where big tech companies should not just be monitored, but also held accountable where necessary, where required. And obviously, if you set the rules now, or if you define the frameworks now, this topic is only going to gain more importance in the future. The second point that I do want to raise that even Ms. Grace touched on was about vaccine equity. Recently, there has been a lot of controversy about patented COVID-19 vaccine not being shared with the countries in the global south and them not being able to develop. So as a result, the only option they have left is to buy from the Western countries. While I do understand the purpose of copyrights and patents, especially in the field of like biotechnology, there is a lot of research in the West on how AI, artificial intelligence, that is, and machine learning can be utilized to harness development, and especially human development. So therefore, these kind of technologies should be to some extent be open sourced, or there should be mechanisms in place that make the distribution of such tech equitable in some way in the global south. This is both an opportunity and a threat for human development. And this is especially ironic considering that a lot of brain drain that happens from the south to the north, those are the people responsible for innovating, for developing this technology. So there's very little benefit that the south receives in return. And lastly, I think today or yesterday, there was a Guardian article which said without addressing climate change, human development, you cannot even talk about human development. And in this specific context, I'd like to talk about how the global south is dealing with technological waste, especially the waste that's coming from the global north, that they do not have proper infrastructure to recycle or reuse, and that's ending up in landfills all across the global south, and especially developing countries, which get paid very heftily for taking in this climate waste. This technology waste. What I understand is that in terms of human development, technology was positioned as being this great equalizer, right? Between the global north and the global south. However, the way that it is innovated, the way that it's adopted, the way that it's distributed, regulated, and utilized in the global south often ends up doing more harm than good. And thank you very much, Ms. Grace and Carolina. I wish you all a very fruitful engagement.
Thank you so much, Tasin. We're gonna share the recording with you as you request. I saw Ravi was raising his hand before. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening. Good evening to all, and thanks for the opportunity. Basically, I would like to underscore one thing, that the three questions are linked, and then the HDR 2021 and 22 is more sequel of the earlier two things. So we have to build a coherent narrative that links the three things. At the same time, I think we have to also think in terms of concepts like South-South cooperation, or South-South in building resilience, and also the idea of risk society, and how South should look at Anthropocene, and then this whole idea of human planetary boundaries, or whatever you call it. Because there are some issues with that one. Anthropocene discourse itself, we have to take it as a contested one, not as something that is given and accepted. So we also have to have our one perspective on the planetary boundaries as to what South is contributing to it, and how the South is also being affected by these changed planetary boundaries. So what I would suggest is that maybe I think we can, as a group, come up with some research questions on each of these things from our own disciplinary or interdisciplinary perspective on all the three things, and then try to address as how to go about it. For example, on my own, from my own work, I can think of writing something like how the emerging technologies are related to these the themes of this HDR, both as a threat, as an opportunity, and also as an issues when it relates to governance on one hand, ethical governance, and then a whole lot of things. So we are in a situation now that everyone knows that, okay, we need some responsible governance. We need to do something about it. But what are the values? What are the norms? How do we go about it? That's the challenge which lies before us. And obviously, day in and day out, we have a lot of new emerging challenges coming from different technologies. whether it is robotics or autonomous vehicles or autonomous, defense systems like that. So I think maybe we can map up certain things. And from my own perspective, I can definitely write something on emerging technologies and then their relationship with the three questions as well as with the HDR team. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for your comment. I know, Khalid, Umar, you also have to leave early, so if you want to take the floor as well before you have to leave.
Thank you very much for providing me this opportunity to share my views on these very interesting discussions and topics you have selected for the HDR preparation. Just briefly talking about how we can, go for this just an inclusive transformation. So in my understanding, as some of my colleagues have already very clearly mentioned and talked about some areas which need intervention. But in my understanding, I think there are 4 areas we really need to look at when we are talking about this inclusive transformation in the global South. One is access to education. There are already huge disparities between regions and between countries. But if we now currently talk about COVID-19, it has actually widened this already existing disparities, particularly intra-country disparities between rural and urban settings. For example, when the COVID hit, most of the educational institutions closed down in many countries, and the rural settings, students living in the rural settings, they did not have the required infrastructure to benefit from the technology to continue their education. So in my understanding, these disparities have further widened between rural and urban settings within countries and also among the regions. Second is basically the digital divide. I understand in many countries of the global South, the infrastructure, the skill set, the resources are very limited when it comes to benefiting from the digital technologies. And this is another area where we need interventions. The third most important is the health services. We understand the pandemic has actually exposed the inadequacies and inefficiencies in the health sector in many developing countries. So going forward, I think regional cooperation is very important in terms of coming up with a regional response to the challenges, because this pandemic is not the last one. There will be many such health emergencies in the future, and no single country can or will be in a position to respond to those challenges. Hence, it is very imperative for regions to come up with a regional response to counter such health emergencies. In my understanding, the fourth important area to look at is female labor force participation. In many and probably most of global South countries, women participation is very low in the labor force. And when this pandemic particularly hit, they actually were the first one to get the layoffs and the furloughs even in the formal sector. But most of our women are employed in the informal sector. So it is very important that women participation, we look at the women participation in the labor force. Otherwise, this disparities will continue to grow and grow for a longer period of time. Coming to the second question, sorry, because I have to leave early, so I will just quickly talk about some of the threats which and the challenges to human development in the global South. In my view, the foremost and the very important threat is the climate change right now, and the resulting droughts and the changing weather patterns, and its eventual impact on food security. We know hundreds of millions of people are already struggling to make ends meet. And when there are any uneven weather patterns, the crops patterns change, the weather patterns change. So the food security becomes a big challenge. So in my understanding, the climate change would be the top most important threat for human development going forward. Second important threat is economic recession. We know the new strains of virus are emerging every month, every quarter, and we don't see the end to that right now. And the vaccination speed of vaccination is also very slow. So countries in the global south are already highly indebted, and there is less likelihood that that we are going to see an economic recovery very soon. So if the economic recession continues, limited resources will be available to spend on human development like health, education, sanitation, and the welfare of the people. So this will again become a big challenge for human development in at least for a few years to come. And coming to the opportunities, I feel that there is a realization at the global level that these challenges are global and requires a global response. I think this is a good realization, and I see countries and regions and the corporate sector making alliances to respond to such challenges. I think this is a very positive takeaway from this pandemic, and of course, no single country can fix these problems. Therefore, the regional responses and global responses are very important. And also another opportunity, which my colleagues have already mentioned, is the breakthrough technologies. We know that technologies are changing every year, and they are getting cheaper and effective. So if this pace continues, it is a great opportunity for Global South to harness this technology to improve service delivery, improve governance structure, improve rule of law in their respective countries. And just coming to the last question, which is the metrics for HD, I believe any metric and any indicator we use should be, the objectives should be traceable, they should be measurable. That whatever we actually target today, we should be able to measure it after 5 years, what went wrong, what we succeeded, and where we failed. So in addition to these traditional HDI indicators, I would suggest to include ICT adoption as one of the indicators, the provision of internet and broadband services in countries, and bank accounts, percentage of people having bank accounts in the formal sector and maybe in the non-formal sector. And also it is very important to include women's participation in the labor force as one of the HDI human development indicator for the coming years. So these are my brief thoughts, and thank you very much for providing me this opportunity, and I wish you have a very, very productive discussion going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid, for such insightful thoughts. I see also Jay has raised his hand. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this. As I raised my hand, Khalid started making all the points that I wanted to make. So thank you, Khalid. But let me just quickly say a couple of things, keeping in mind time. One of the things that I wanted to, I think the question on how can we ensure just and inclusive transformations, I think we need to definitely look into the aspect of education from a perspective of inclusivity. That is, it's not necessary that all entities look at it from that particular lens. And it's very important to make sure that that particular lens is highlighted to the respective entities, governments, institutions. And it's not just the governments, it's also the private institutions that need to be included into that, because unless they see that as an important perspective, they do invest a lot of money into communities. And I think it is important for them to also look at it from that perspective. On the aspects on threats and opportunities, I think it is no surprise that climate change is a very big one. And I think this is where there is an opportunity from the perspective that the developing countries need not follow the same development pathway that the developed countries had done in the past. I mean, they do not need to go through the perspective of heavy environmental degradation before they start cleaning up the environment. I think we need to set everybody on a path that is clean, and I think there are technologies related to that needs to be looked at fairly carefully, but I think those are important aspects that can be seen as an opportunity. We do not need to have bad air before we get to good air. I think we can get to good air without having to get through the bad air days. That's an important thing. From a perspective of metrics, I think previous speaker definitely said it a lot. I think we need to add to the aspect of clean water, clean air, but I think we need to also add the concept of access to digital information and actually access to finance. I think he mentioned that in terms of banking, but I think it could be also expanded to not just the formal banking, but also the informal banking that could help with some of these people. And I think the last part on ICT, I think it's important that we should also not have it like the way we defined electrified villages in India, which is, does it have one light bulb? I think there should be a metric that says that so many megabits per second or some sort of metric needs to be apportioned to saying that how much is available to each participant, because that is where it could make a difference between access to ICT to be able to do banking or to just browse the web. I think they are two completely different things. And I think that is something that needs to be conveyed. The other is the access to I think in the early days of the internet, you did have these internet kiosks. Now with mobile banking, it has become not so important, but it might become important in certain areas of the globe where access to these kinds of instruments may not be possible. So providing that access, and I think the metrics there could be how many minutes to a particular place. It need not be in your own house, which then brings us to the aspect of nutrition and health also, because these are important metrics that needs to be captured, where women have access to healthcare within, let's say, a certain distance from their homes. And again, that should be quantified in terms of time rather than in distance, because 5 kilometers may seem a lot to some places, but there could be public transport available, which is good. But in other places, 5 kilometers means impossible for the person to actually get to that place. So I think these are some of the points that I would like to make. I think opportunities on technology are huge, but I think they need to be examined carefully in this because technology is not the panacea. It's not the fix all. It's just a means to a particular end. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks so much, Jay, for raising your hands and for these comments. So now I think we have Professor Justin Lin. He connected, and then we can go. I saw you raise your hand, Shang. So we can go first with Professor Lin and then with Shang. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to attend this very important consultation. I think at this uncertainty time, the most important thing for human development is to ensure jobs for the people, especially in the underdeveloped areas. Due to the pandemic and the lockdown, and many countries encounter recessions and so on, and especially small business were hit hardly, and as a result, many jobs are lost. And I think it's very important to provide some kind of special programs to ensure the small and medium-sized enterprises can continue their business. And so they can, providing the job to the people. Otherwise, many people will, losing their job, losing their income, and it will be a human disaster. And I think it's very important for both international community as well as the government in the country to to provide some tax relief was some physical support and to help the enterprises to weather through this challenging times. And after, I think the pandemic overall will be over sooner or later. Certainly we hope it will be soon, but anyway, it will be over. And when the pandemic is over, I think it's very important to have a way, a path for the business to be set up, and especially to have the industry upgrading in sectors which the country has competitive advantages, because competitive advantage is the foundation for competitiveness. And the government also need to encourage the investment domestically and also foreign direct investment. And because in many low-income countries, the condition is not conducive for the industrial development. But as we know, without transformation from poor agrarian economy to manufacturing economy, it won't be able to generate decent job for the people. So I think at this time we need to have both urgent support to stabilize the job situation, and in the futures we need to have the conducive environment for encouraging investment. And in this process, certainly ICT and so on can be a very important investment to reduce the business cost. But at the same time, to have a target support for sectors which the country has comparative advantage will be essential. So let me stop here.
Thank you so much for your comments, Professor Lin. And now we're going to, I think she just disconnected. She had raised her hand, but I see there's also another hand from Yuefen Lee. So if you want to go ahead and do your intervention.
I'm not the first. There's someone before me, right?
Yeah, there was someone else, but I think she just disconnected.
Oh, I see. So you would like me to go ahead?
Yeah,
okay.
You can go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm Yuefen Lee from the South Center. This is the first time for the South Center to join such kind of activities of the Global Think Tank Network. We are pleased and also privileged. And I also appreciate very much the UNDP, including UNOSSC initiative to reach out to the Southern think tanks to brainstorm your flagship report. Just now, the UNDP presenter introduced the basic ideas, views for the coming report. And mentioned about the trilogy. I think, as he mentioned, that 2019 you dealt with inequality, and 2020 Anthropocene, and this year, of course, the next one will be something building on the previous two reports. But I think right now we are facing a serious problem. That is, all the problems dealt with in the previous two reports have become even worsened. We know with the pandemic, inequalities has definitely further worsened. And also the climate change threats have been increased, extreme weather also become more frequent. And we also see the kind of regression, reversal on the part of inequalities in poverty, in hunger, and also particularly in education and also in gender equality. So here I think it will be very important to raise the issue to a higher level. not only institution, which will be very important, but also governance and the inherent structural problems which make these inequalities and divergences become even worse. I think we need to really deal with the deeper root cause, not just the phenomenon of these kind of problems. And especially now, the pandemic, we thought it would be finishing earlier, but with the new variant, with Omicron, we know that probably it will be even further delayed. So I think we need to highlight the most urgent challenges the southern countries are facing right now. The previous speakers mentioned one thing which is very urgent is the vaccine access. There is this divide which is really terrible. We know almost 96% of the low-income countries have no access to vaccine, while the mature economies are having their boosters. So how to solve this kind of problem? Why these kind of problems would become this severe? And it seems there isn't an obvious way to deal with that. So we really need to dig into the root cause of the current problem, the urgency, the emergency. And another emergency mentioned just now by the previous speaker was the debt problems, which is also the financing problem, which is also related with vaccine access. For instance, COVAX does not have sufficient money to provide doses of vaccine to the low-income countries. The same with the debt problems. It can worsen the inequalities, and we know 2022, this debt servicing will be peaking. Meanwhile, we know that the United States tapering is picking up speed, which means the borrowing costs will be higher, and the debt problems will become severe. So how to deal with this problem? We know that there was this new allocation of SDRs, but most of the money, according to IMF quotas, we all know the money went to the mature economies. How to reach the 100 billion reallocation of SDRs to the developing countries? This would be an urgent issue. I hope the financing issue could be also dealt with, not only in the sense of climate financing, but also in dealing with the current emergencies. Of course, we also have other emergencies coming along. So I think it will be really important for the flagship report to deal with these kind of problems and provide some recommendations to solve the problem. And for the metrics, I think it's important to discuss, but it's also important to discuss why in the past many of the standards and rules have a bias against developing countries, and how for going forward, the future metrics will take into consideration of the special conditions of the developing countries. So there is, of course, a high hopes for the new report. And I certainly hope that a new report will deal with these urgent and burning issues, and also going into the root causes of the kind of problems we're facing: the vaccine divide, the regression and reversal in poverty alleviation, education, gender, jobs, many of the problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your intervention. So I see a couple of hands raised up. I'm gonna go back to Professor Xuanhong Shang because she had raised her hand before. Sorry, I didn't saw you online, but you can go ahead and do your intervention.
Thank you, Carolina. And can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you, Shams, for your kind invitation. It's my great pleasure to join this very interesting discussion. And I would like to focus on two aspects. The first is the global scenario now. If we look at the latest data published by OECD, you can see the inequality between countries is increasing as the recovery from COVID-19 is very uneven. If we look at the data shows four aspects of shocking contrast. The first is the vaccine orders. For developed countries, 3.6 doses per person, but for developing countries, only 0.5 doses per person. And also the physical stimulus is very different. And 22.3% of GDP from developed countries, only 1.7 to 6.6% of GDP. And of course, access to distance learning, 80% to 30%, and changes for teleworking, 20% of the labor forces from developed countries, and 12% of labor forces from the developing countries. Yeah, this provides a really big picture about the globalization process. The global South has suffered huge negative impact from this kind of globalization. So from this side, for a long time, a globalization process has brought huge benefits to developed countries. However, the global South, the developing countries, suffered first when it comes to the negative impact. From this aspect, we can say, development of global South is hardly to say is a kind of endogenous process, right? And we really need global solidarity, and we really need new global development framework to tackle this unevenness and imbalance between developed and developing countries. First, I think we need to, of course, to go beyond the North-South developing paradigm. ODA definitely is not sufficient. And for South-South cooperation, and we also need to reflect before, South-South cooperation always advocate reciprocity rather than solidarity, a win-win, mutual benefit, right? During these uncertain times, I think, we should prioritize solidarity before reciprocity. And this is really important. I recently published a book, a paper to discuss this issue. I shared this book with this paper with some other colleagues. So Southern countries could be a new driving force for multilateralism and to consolidate this kind of global solidarity. And another thing, is we really need public goods, global public goods. And first thing is to reach consensus. All countries need to have shared willingness and responsibility to pay for global public goods, like the global system of climate change and resistance to nuclear proliferation, control of transmittable diseases like COVID-19 pandemic, and reduction of refugee flows. And the consensus to finance these public goods through normative mechanisms based on not only solidarity, but also reciprocity and collective responsibility should be emphasized. Of course, the role of ODA should not be replaced, it needs to be enhanced and how to address it well. I just now, the colleagues from China also said the financial inclusion is very important. The G20's DSSI, and also the better allocation of SDRs to developing countries. Another thing I want to add is financial stability. Global financial stability could also be one type of global public goods. The huge stimulus funding from the developed countries actually had spilled over effect on global scaled inflation. And many developing countries are suffering from this kind of global inflation, like food price increase. So how to ensure financial stability also needs global stability. So that's from the global perspective. The second is the issue of human inequality. If we look at the real cause of human inequality, I think structural transformation factors actually means more from domestic perspective, urbanization, rural urban gap, and also aging educational level. And if we look at China's experiences, we see the relationship between urbanization and inequality shows the inverted U-shaped pattern. So to promote urbanization and shorten the process of urbanization will be an effective way to promote human inequality. Of course, shorten rural urban gaps and find effective ways to tackling aging and increase the human capital capacity. It's also very important. And another thing is physical policies like tax reduction or expenditure on social security and redistribution. These measures are very effective to reduce human inequality. It should be emphasized. And yeah, I agree with Grace said at the beginning, uncertain times also brings opportunities for human development, like, now lifelong learning in China is promoted, and also peer teaching or informal learning. The young teenagers at home can teach senior people how to use network. So all these are positive signs. I think it's a really good time to think about this and how to use institutional framework to promote lifelong learning is really important. This needs to be joined by private sectors, not only just public sectors. And the most important thing I want to emphasize is the public education. The divergence caused by caused by the different system of education is actually the root cause. The literacy is important, but scientific literacy on science is more important. This can only be shouldered by the public education system. Okay, I just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shuang Hong. And also, I will be really interested in reading the paper you mentioned about solidarity. So if you can share your research on that, I will be grateful. So I have a couple of hands up. I'm gonna give the floor first to Sayuba Cuedrago, if you want to start your intervention.
Thank you. My intervention will be focused in underdevelopment country, particularly for African country. The response for me, it must be global, because if you want to have the development for our country or in African country, we must take the environment for people. After we have a population that is young. When you have a young population, for me, it is to give the better education for young people. After this education, you must have some condition that people have a job to have income for live. When you want to have the income for young people, it's better to have the technology transformation focalized in for the young people. And other thing, we must take our culture, because young people have some idea that can have some promotion to promote the development. And the young people don't like to have some institution that can give that cannot give some liberty, some freedom to think. In this condition, the institution of African, particularly under country, must be response for young people disease or choice. And for this institution must have a good, better governance for the institution. And this situation, I think that we must try to promote the financial government for the institution. And another thing is that if you ask people, particularly young people, they like to make political, but which political to promote the development must be the good choice for young people, because if you have some corruption in the institution, young people don't like this institution. For this reason, we notice that some young people don't believe money institution in the development country. It is why you must give the freedom for young people. And another thing, we can have some project focalized for young people to make their goal. it's better to have a market to make elocution, but there are some people that have not capability to go to the market to have something. For this reason, we have two ways for people that have a capability to go to the market, or over that we develop some other way like solidarity to help these people for have just opportunity to live. The last thing, I think that the management of a natural resource and mining. For this reason, when you have a bad allocation about natural resources, we cannot have the choice for the young people. And if you studies the election, young people don't participate enough in development country, because we have some election that it is not the best, that it did not promote the best development for people. For this reason, we might have better institutions that will give the best response for people. But if you have an institution, make some election, we say that it is government, it is not the best way, because if institutions that don't give the best answer for people's choice, I think that we cannot have the best development for our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ayuba. You'll be glad to know we also had a consultation with youth a couple of weeks ago, and they shared the same concerns as you about education, connecting to the job market, and later also the participation in civic spaces. So these comments are really useful for us as well. So I'm gonna go next to Andre de Melo, and then after that I have Meg Xiang Shu. So Andre, you can go ahead.
Many thanks, Carolina. And let me start out by commending the editors and organizers of the report for selecting this important topic of inequality and uncertainty. And let me also try to pick up on some of the many mechanisms through which inequality leads to greater uncertainty. And in particular, those that I think have not come up thus far in our discussion, and also in the introductory materials that you have shared. And I'm also referring to the e-discussion that has been taking place thus far. We know that the most unequal countries are found in the global south. And this is no coincidence, because there is a very robust relationship, even if it's complex and not fully understood, between inequality and development. And that goes way back. Economic historians have been arguing, for instance, for a long time that North America has developed a lot more than Latin America, precisely because it was from the start a much more equal colony based on small plots of land and with much lower degree of hierarchization than in Latin America. And obviously more recent works in the literature also show a very robust relationship between inequality and development. So again, it's no coincidence that those countries that are less developed are also present a higher degree of inequality. Now, one of the ways through which inequality affects development through greater uncertainty is by generating greater political instability and also a greater incidence of crime. So here uncertainty would be more of an intervention variable, if you like, between inequality and political instability and violence broadly conceived. Now, greater political instability and crime, obviously, they in turn undermine investment. And we know this because investors, they do not like political instability for obvious reasons, right? And political instability tends to generate more uncertainty. Investors also don't like uncertainty. Actually, they would prefer even bad outcomes or bad policy decisions than an environment where they do not know what is going to happen, or they have a high degree of uncertainty on future outcomes. And so as a consequence of lower investment, inequality also tends to undermine economic growth. And this is also an issue that I think has not come up here. If we want more just and fair transformations in the global south, we have to speak at some point of economic growth, because I don't think we can achieve such transformations without it. Now, growth depends on investment. And if investment doesn't take place in an environment of high uncertainty and high political instability, then obviously societies that are more unequal will also have lower rates of investment and of economic growth. Inequality also undermines political development, and in particular, the development of functional democracies. And again, the relationships here are bilateral. They go two ways and they're complex, but democracy in turn also tends to reduce political violence, if not political instability as a whole. And so we know that democracies do not function well in the context of high inequality. And the most unequal countries also, even when they are democratic as such, they are what we call ugly democracies, right? They're not very functional. And this goes back to Tocqueville, who first noted this relationship. But when we have ugly or fragile democracies and greater political instability, this is also a fertile ground for the rise of populist leaders, which we have seen around the world recently, even before the pandemic. And these leaders also, to a large extent, they tend to oppose, for instance, policies to control climate change, oftentimes also to reduce inequality. And so we fall into a vicious cycle, which is not new. But the COVID pandemic has accelerated all these processes and intensified them. And so we come to the issue of what can be done to break these cycles of inequality leading to all these undesirable outcomes, which in turn tend to feed into inequality. In the short term, I would argue we need welfare programs. We have good examples from Latin America, in particular from Mexico and Brazil, with cash transfer programs such as Bolsa Familia. These are policies that have been tested across time and space. They have been proven to be highly effective, and they have a very favorable cost-benefit rate. Cash transfers such as these, they generate economic dynamism. They generate a multiplier effect. We know that investing in the poor has a much better payoff than investing in the rich. And the programs, they prove this. And it also makes a lot more sense to give money to the poor, because the poor know exactly what their needs are and how to best spend that money, than to give them, for instance, food stamps or vouchers of different sorts for gas and other commodities. So this works well in the short term, and it's a powerful tool to fight inequality, but it will not suffice. Obviously, if we want more long-term and deeper change, we need some kind of structural change, and this cannot be carried out, I don't think, without investing heavily in the social sector, and particularly in health and in education. And obviously there are many proposals in that regard, but that would be the way to go to try to break this vicious cycle. Now, one of the questions posed to us concerned metrics, and let me speak very briefly about this, because I think my country, Brazil, which is one of the most unequal countries in the world, I think it's the most unequal outside of Africa, but it also has a very interesting experience trying to measure inequality and to determine whether it's going up or down or how it's evolving across time. And you know, at first, inequality in the country seemed to be grossly underestimated because we were focusing solely on income earnings and particularly in wage earnings. If you look just on these kind of flows, then you'll be missing out a big part of the picture, which has to do obviously with other sources of wealth and the income that derives from capital. And obviously, this is one of the main insights brought about by Thomas Piketty, and he changed the way we looked at inequality by looking not just at basic income wage earnings, but on income tax returns, which has a broader approach to the gains of the poor and the rich, and thereby we see that inequality is still persistent and it's a lot higher than we used to think. But this also tends to, in a way, overestimate inequality. More recent studies have also shown we also need to factor in welfare services. So if the poor have access to free health services, free education, pensions and the like, then this also has to be taken into account as part of the income that they receive. And if you put that in, then inequality obviously decreases. So we need to think about all these metrics so that we don't miss out how important factors in how we account for inequality and whether actually it's going up or down, because even the direction of change might vary depending on the measure that we take into account. And I know others want to speak, so I'll stop here. Many thanks again. Take care.
Thank you so much for your comments, Andre. We've been looking into inequality since the 2019 report. And I think your comments on political stability and democracy are very useful for the section on collective action and how social movements respond to this. And on the part of welfare programs, we're definitely looking at what it means to have like social protection and adaptive systems, especially in this case with the pandemic. So thank you so much. Now I'm gonna go next to Meixiang Xu, and after that I have Adel Ben Youssef, and at the end Sofian Sarawi. So please be patient for your interventions. Meixiang Xu, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay, great. I'm very glad to hear all the insights from the first colleagues shared. Certainly, I am inspired by all the constructive thoughts that talked about from different perspectives. Here, I would like to focus on the technology perspective. For an HDR, I think we need to focus on those elements related to human development. So although we have climate issues, environmental concerns, we have other concerns, but here I think our HDR will focus on those aspects related to human development, which I would focus on the elements of new technology, especially digital technology. We can look at the general global inequality, as mentioned by many other colleagues. There is already a huge gap between the rich and the poor, the rich countries and poor countries. The rising global wealth inequality is also striking. The richest 1% people owns 88% of world wealth. we all see the rising income inequality, especially reached the highest in the past half century. This is worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of people and students in developing countries could not continue education or jobs due to the lack of access to internet or ICT devices, distance education, etc. And also the low-skilled and educated labor in developing countries more easily excluded from the labor market or entering the technologically advanced business world. And in developing countries, there's also a lack of scale, data, and technology, which are foundations for new technology, especially AI, deep learning, and enterprises, the same facing lagging behind or more disadvantaged in digital transformation area. Certainly this inequality exists in the poor, the vulnerable groups of people, because they are in more need of access to digital infrastructure. And this is also worsened by the pandemic and by the digitalization. General threats also mentioned by colleagues from economic way, the economic recession, inflation, fiscal crisis in many countries, especially poor countries, surging debts and asset bubbles. Socially, the threats come from social instability, demonstrations, involuntary migration, and disparities concerned with ethnicity, races, and marginalized people, as mentioned by the opening remarks done by Grace. We also see the threat from food crisis, hunger, water crisis, infectious disease, and poverty related to digital technology development and automation. Labor force disruption is a big threat. It causes unemployment in certain sectors, especially manufacturing, agriculture, and it causes more informal work. The informal work we know is related to the lack of social welfare, safety nets, because they are not established as the formal work. And as the work, labor, and productions getting more digitalized, the welfare is lagging behind. So there is increasing working poor and consequently widening inequality. Threats also come from, well, climate aspect, climate change related to biodiversity loss and livelihoods. But these are the general threats. But coming to the technology side, we see three waves of technology, especially digital technology, from computer, broadband, mobile telecommunication, to internet platforms, social networking, cloud computing, Internet of Things, robotics, machine learning, and AI, big data, 3D printing. These digital technologies cause a digital divide. Technology divide exists in different countries and also among different groups of people. We see the divide between the developed country and developing country. Some in the Northern Europe, as of January of this year, 96% of internet penetration rates was reached. but in some country, it's 0%. Generally in 2017, by 2017, the internet penetration rate is in developed countries is double that of in developing countries. Now in this year, about 40% of people do not have access to internet. Well, the global average internet penetration rate was about 60%. And this is worse in developing countries because they are in a very passive position in the distribution of dividends in the digital economy. And technology-driven wealth growth has been concentrated in developed economies. So let's look down deeper to the threats of new technology. First, we can see is from the workforce disruption, digitalized labor, digitalized work, automation of jobs. And according to the World Bank estimation, 1.2 billion workers may face losing job because of their work will be automated. And this job security coming from a new technology application will increase stress on the labor force, especially women workers. And it will certainly influence workers' mental health, especially women. At the same time, there is a lack of social security or work welfare for remote and temporary work, digital work. The informal labor very often has low paid, our wage is low, and their welfare is also lacking, especially for those temporary labor working for digital labor platforms. And the technology threat also is seen in degradation of human relationships. Due to a lot of time and use of technology, people facing, especially the young people, are facing barriers in reading, living alone, and interpersonal skills development. And then in this aspect, mental health issue also rise. And the technology pushes society to move along a capital-intensive pathway to wealth generation. And this may create poverty traps and cause inequality. A threat of new technology also rise in social networking by isolating individuals and widening social distance. There is also a rise in gender divide and deepen social inequality between the haves and the have-nots, especially in education, business. Disparities rise in labor quality because in the developed economies, people get easier access to technology, to new device, to distance learning opportunities. So their training and skills related to new technology is usually higher and easily acquired. Then the technology-driven wealth accumulation and development gives them more opportunities, while it's their threats to the poor and to the vulnerable people. Last but not least, the threats coming from the cyber insecurity. Because of the new technology, fast development, cyber attacks, data fraud or theft, violation of privacy, and also the lack of global technology governance. There's a lack of framework, standards, rules globally adopted. So cyber insecurity issue rise. After talking about the threats, of course, technology will bring us a lot of opportunities. A lot of opportunities will help us to eliminate poverty. And of course, we need to eliminate digital poverty as well. So the opportunity from technology innovation will help to improve human life. Usually we see with higher efficiency, because of the machine using automation, and especially we can see it in e-commerce, e-trading, better health and skills, and new jobs in some sectors such as services and information, and data generation, etc. And opportunities will also come to boost the new economy, digital related, like e-commerce and digital infrastructure. Southern countries will have to join hands to narrow the digital gap they face and catch up with the technology development. And opportunities will also help with narrowing the digital divide through digital inclusion. A more and wider, closer cooperation within the country with enterprises, with different sectors and countries. So digital inclusion will be also promoted, especially in sectors such as education, e-commerce, manufacturing, agribusiness. And the social networks will bring in more indirect employment. And for this digital awareness, opportunities will come from learning, training, and education. Colleagues previously mentioned that people need to enhance their literacy in technology, especially digital technologies, and promote technology transfer. The opportunities will be huge, and application of more integrated cross-sector and cross-country collaboration and development in technology. It will also promote global supply and consumption. And in some way, it will narrow the gaps, say, in education, especially after the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of students are really losing access to education. So if the technology is promoted by government, by enterprises, and children, students under this pandemic era will, get back their opportunities in education. So wider and faster application of this new technology is really on high demand. And the technology will bring opportunities to raise more funds jointly, globally, and also nationally for technology transfer and integration, as well as application to allow more people and countries to share technological dividends. After talking about I think HDR, although cannot address or answer all questions, But globally, hope this report can raise awareness and draw high attention from governments and enterprises and other stakeholders to develop more global products, global efforts for capacity building in technology, training in technology talents, and promote education, distance education through technology application, and provide more public goods, knowledge products to increase people's understanding of new technology. And of course, ask for joint financing and global financing for digital technology application and innovation. Of course, hope the report can also encourage more collaboration. Also application in sectors, especially education, health, e-commerce, manufacturing, etc. And last but not least, governance, again, is also important. We need institutional arrangements for the application and use of new technology and to better serve human development. So that's the thoughts from my end. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much for your intervention. I don't want to take more time, so I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to Adel Ben Youssef, and then Sofiane, you will be next. Thanks for your patience. Adel, go ahead.
Thank you very much, James, for giving me this opportunity to speak and to share my views. I will not be long. I'm speaking on behalf of AGE, Arab Governance Institute in Tunisia, and MENAPAR. And Sofiane will complement. I have just 2 points, and I think that the last speakers has make a wonderful speech about the digitalization, so I can add some small things. And also I would like to add things about green skills. So let me start by the digital skills. Of course, many of the intervention highlighted the needs that we equip the people with basic skills for inclusion. And I think that we have not invested enough on this. And during the pandemic, we have seen that these skills are needed, not only for education or health, they are needed in everyday life. And this is what is new. So we need to equip people with e-skills. And these e-skills are operational skills, how to use some basic tools and softwares, etc., but also informational skills. So this goes beyond e-literacy. It's not only literacy, it's to understand the structure of information on the internet, how to get the right information, how to move from one information to another, how to structure this, and to how to navigate on this internet. So really we need to equip people how to navigate. And this is key for education. This is key for education because people need to use this technology for learning, but also this is new. They need to learn by themselves, the ability to learn. So this is new. So in the context of complicated world online, they need to navigate and they need to learn how to learn. And when we speak about digital technology, most of the time we highlight the positive impacts and we do not stress enough the negative side. And the negative side, it's word of manipulation, word of fake news, word of cyber traffic, etc. And we need to be very careful when we push population, especially from the south, to this word. So that's why we need to invest in e-skills, and e-skills are needed for financial inclusion, for so many other things, and also for health nowadays. But in digital world, we need also to have a new direction of this technology. You know, when we speak about digitalization, there is two components. The first component is the extent of this technology. We have several waves of technology available nowadays. They are already in our everyday life. But to solve what? What are the questions? What are the problems that we are solving? And here we need to curve not the extent of the technology, but the direction of the technology. And the direction of the technology, we need to direct this technology to solve our problem in the South. We need to direct this technology in order to solve local problems. And this is also we need smart technology, but cheap technology, useful technology, friendly technology. And this is not the case. So we need to equip also to have the skills in order to curve the curve of the technology. In a wonderful paper by Tuning and Verdier in American Economic Review, they say that the inequalities are rising from technology and globalization. And the technology, because we have curved the technology in a way they are skill-based. So they are favoring the most equipped, the most skilled, and they are not favoring the less. So we need really to change. About the metrics, I have suggested some couple of years before, 4 types of digital skills and digital divides. We need not only to look at the equipment, we need to look also at the usage, the performance, how people are equipped, but how they are using. Are they performing or not when they are using this technology? And in what extent they are learning to use this technology. So there are 4 levels at least, and most of the metrics, especially in human development, they are just measuring the first divide, the equipment side, and not the other impact. For the green skills, I am a negotiator on behalf of Tunisia, and I know very well this in matter of climate change during the COPs. So we now, at least the South is unit under the G77 plus China, and we have a common really problems, and we are pushing to have a common solution. But I think that all our countries have signed the Paris Agreement, and with the COP26, we have adopted already the rule of book, the rules book. That means that now we are going to implement. And for the implementation, we need green skills. And green skills, we are not ready. We are not ready for the adaptation. And the problem of the climate change is causing inequalities, because climate change is already hitting the most vulnerable, and they need to adapt to a new context. They are losing their jobs. They are not able to invest anymore so we need to equip them with adaptation skills to survive, to find new jobs, to surpass variability of weather, etc., etc. So this is a big challenge, and I think that we need to stress this in our human capital, this report, because we are trying to do our best, our negotiator, in order to mobilize the climate finance. But we need with this climate finance to invest in these skills. And I think that there is lack of awareness of how hard are these skills to be acquired by local people in order to adapt to a new context. So I wonder if we can cooperate here in order to see how we can build these skills in order to adapt our countries to the new context. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I think I was not so long, so Sofiane can complement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adele. Definitely all the concerns you're mentioning now, we are looking into it in the technology part of it, and also this digital divide by different groups, and especially what you are mentioning about using technology to solve social problems. We're looking into that when we look into collective action and how communities come up with solutions, and technology is one important tool for that. So I'm gonna leave the floor now for Sofian Sarawi for his intervention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. I thank everybody. I know we'll go no beyond the time allocated for this session. Is it possible for me to share my presentation directly?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, where is l'écran partagé? Okay, should be here. Where is my presentation? Why it does not appear? Sorry about this. A second, please. Damn it.
Dr. Sufyan, if you have any issues, we can do it from our end.
I sent it by email.
Sure.
Yeah.
No worries. We will share it. We will share it. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. So I'll be very quick because most of the stuff has been done. Of course, most of these ideas. You hear me, right?
Yeah, we hear you well.
Okay. So most of these ideas I have already shared in the discussion that was going on, and I'll just, I've rephrased them a little bit, and let me go through them quickly. And as I said, most of the stuff has been already said. Okay, my approach is more of a governance approach. Of course, I have not tried to look into, the dynamics of community transformations and the technology, etc. So, going back to the issue of just and inclusive transformation to cope with uncertain time. I start from the premise that transformation by definition cannot be just and inclusive, because it is disruptive and therefore it provokes different trajectories for different peoples and communities. If you look at the state of the world now, we have the so-called developed world and the underdeveloped world, etc. It is obviously the result of some major transformation that took place some time ago and the development of nations. All right. Now, what is more important, at least the way I look at it, is we have to create the level playing field for communities to be able to succeed through transformation. That's really what is more important. So the inclusiveness is not as much in terms of whether people come out successful or communities come out successfully from transformation, but whether they have the chance to really be part of that transformation and whether they have the necessary capacity, to see the opportunity presented by the transformation. That's what I call the level playing field. And of course, you probably noticed that I was very harsh and, quite condemning in saying that governments and states are the biggest determinants of capacity building and for responsible for creating these level playing fields for actors of transformations. And the situation in the developing world is that usually, and here you can associate them like on a one-to-one basis, it's in the less capacitated states or the ill-governed states. So that's where we find most of the inequality and most of the problems with community development, etc. And generally speaking, of course, because it's also the bias of my field of study, if you want, or of professional field, which is public governance and public administration, it's state bureaucracies that are the number one responsible for communities not seizing the full extent of the opportunities offered by transformation. So whenever you find bad state governance, automatically it means that you're going to have all of the other problems that we are talking about and that the Human Development Report tries to tackle, right? Well, why is that? Of course, there are so many reasons for that. We're not going to go over that, but one key factor is that transformation are generally perceived as a threat to state control, and therefore the state in trying to gain control of transformation ends up really impeding communities from successfully going through them. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, let's move on to the threats and opportunities from this point of view of that I've just mentioned now. Of course, the threats are the state and governance itself, the lack of rule of law and democratic states, populism, etc. I think many of these things have been mentioned. Dysfunctional bureaucracies, for me, it is by far the most important aspect, you know. Corruption, which is more of a byproduct of the dysfunctional bureaucracies, and of course, the oligarchies and the rentier states. So the overall state organization. And I think if the UN and international organizations want to do something about community development, and I know they do that, but they have to be, you know, strict, and they have to really look into that and to ensure that state governance is good before even they move beyond. It's very difficult to get directly to communities without the filtering effect of state governance. Of course, there are some other threats, and I think they've been mentioned by many, like the natural cataclysm, the COVID and other pandemics, climate change, of course, the depletion of natural resources such as water, energy, and you name it. So basically, we're living more and more in a more and more difficult world, with larger populations and fewer resources, although innovation also allows to create additional resources. Neocolonialism also is a real fact, with the hunt for natural resources from the powerful countries. You know, Africa is a big example. The co-optation of corrupt elites, you know, and again, this is filtered through state bureaucracies that keep community, of course, in weak positions. Wars and invasions, you know, I will not, of course, don't want to get political, but you know very well that countries, they go and wage wars to ensure control over resources, even reduce international mobility through the whole discourse of migration, etc. I think it's some sort of a form of neocolonialism when, in the opposite direction, there are no such restrictions. And of course, all of this ends up in increased inequalities. And inequalities, it breeds all of the problems that communities face. Chaos and failed states are also a threat, and it's increasing threats, by the way, be it civil wars like you look at Yemen, you look at Somalia, or maybe you look at some other countries, you know, the foreign debt and the risk of state collapse, which is there, you know, increasingly there, especially after the COVID crisis. And the end result, of course, within chaotic and failed state is disenfranchised communities with violence, criminality, and mental health, indeed. And I like the presentation by the Chinese colleague that emphasized mental health. But even mental health at the level of community is an important factor. I think it's increasingly something. Now, all of this are truly true, they are threats, but they also could be an opportunity for transitioning to a capacitated state. I do not want to be cynical, but if I look at a country like Rwanda, it's only after, you know, they went through the genocide that they really got their act together, and with proper leadership, they could build something that looks to be viable. Maybe Vietnam is another thing. Of course, if you went back to World War II, we could mention the case of Japan, but Japan, of course, has a completely different historical dynamic. So in some cases, I'm in a country, for example, we have a lot of problems, and some people, they tell you, you know what, let the state collapse, you know, at least we'll have a chance to rebuild one. I mean, of course, I'm not a proponent of such point of view, but I'm saying that threats, you know, when they materialize, sometimes they create an opportunity for restarting from scratch and for communities to evolve. Next slide, please. Okay, the opportunities, of course, from political, from a governance, from an established institutional point of view, I think democracies, you know, or emerging democracies are important, you know, with some new state leadership. Some of it is good, of course. Unfortunately, the downtrend is populism and, well, what I would call state leadership, bad state leadership, etc. However, increasingly there is a higher political accountability, both nationally and internationally. And I think just like we have a dominant human rights discourse now that has proven positive to a large extent, I think, you know, we're witnessing also some sort of a discourse that makes it more and more difficult, you know, for bad governments, excuse the expression, you know, to get away with bad governance, let's put it that way. And eventually, I think we have to work on that front to hold governments accountable for what they do towards their people and communities. Another opportunities, and I think this is what has been mentioned the most by people, is the democratization of technology and enhanced access, whether through global value chains, community empowerment programs, higher education level in communities. Of course, now people are more and more educated, and of course, that gives them more tools to be able to go through transformation. Of course, e-learning, and I believe it has also been mentioned by some people, giving them opportunities for learning, you know, and for improving their capacity to be able to seize opportunities for change. There are also new economic and business models for development. I could mention fair trade, although there are criticisms towards this concept, but there are similar ones. E-commerce, of course, it increases the outreach of many communities. The microfinance model, I think, has done a lot of great stuff, but also there are some mass abuses also that are related to this particular model, where it becomes some sort of usury model more than anything else. The corporate social responsibility programs of private business, international corporations also are there, and they represent a good opportunity for direct investment when it is targeted, very well towards communities, etc. And when it bypasses state bureaucracy, they also could be very positive. And finally, and I think the backbone of all of this is civil societies and NGOs. Increasingly, civil societies are better organized, with better governance, and so they are much more effective, and they get involved at all levels. They are also part of international alliances and solidarity, right? And therefore also more proactive. And of course, they can get targeted funding to achieve some of their objectives. Next slide, please. And I think it'll be the last one. Yeah, just one word about the metrics. Of course, the metrics that I'm proposing are in line of what I've been talking about, which is more of a macro governance types of issues. So I divide the metrics into two: state capacity metrics and community transformation metrics. I mean, they're connected to some extent. State capacity metrics is that, all right, are we within a governance framework or within the presence of a state that can really, allow communities, to make the best out of the opportunities that are offered to them. For example, one issue that is major in many countries is the ease of access and reliability of state bureaucracy, because no matter what, you cannot do anything independently of state bureaucracy, and they are the biggest hurdle. So that is a metric that I think should be emphasized to ensure that the level playing field that I talked about before is there. The effectiveness and quality of service delivery to communities, of course, whether it is digitalization, the quality and cost of services, and here I talk mostly education, health, internet access, the scope of services, if you want to get involved in any type of a thing, do you have the corresponding service for that? For example, let's suppose you need to export, physically speaking, in some countries, it's extremely difficult or virtually impossible to get involved in the international trade, because it's either controlled by few or it is too complicated, bureaucratic, or whatever it is. Women and minority group participation in the labor market, that's also an important issue, because the end result, if you want everybody to be involved, it's not a matter of few capitalists, enjoying the benefits of what these of these transformations, and the access to funding and banking service. And I think also this was mentioned before. And the community transformation metrics, going back specifically to this, the issue of level playing field, the access to development initiatives. I mean, not all communities have equal access and can participate in development initiatives. We have to kind of find a measure for that, in terms of level of access. The sustainability of community projects and initiatives. I live in a country where there were so many initiatives during the COVID-19. They have virtually disappeared now, all of them. They were great initiatives. Some of them were picked up elsewhere. They were not sustainable, again, because of funding mechanisms, because of bureaucracy, because whatever the reason. The quality of civil society and NGOs also, we tend to think about civil society NGOs as if it is, a monolithic thing, as if they are the same everywhere in the world. They are not. Of course, there are countries where they are much more developed than others, and we have to look at why is that the case and make sure that we build the capacity of this organization. The quality and flexibility of regulation towards community transformation. There are countries that suffer crippling regulation, that where basically everything is forbidden, and where the central administration does not allow anything to go through. Access to international collaboration, again, is an important metric. If you are within a community, how much, how easy is it for you to basically tie up with a global value chain, for example, or to tie up with some other international organization to do joint things. The diversity of community engagement in terms, again, of the communities that are involved, etc. and the access to technology, and I've just mentioned that. I think this is just my remarks, and again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion.
Thanks so much, Sofian. So I think you leave us with a lot of things to reflect, especially the first comment you made about transformation. It cannot be just an inclusive because of its nature of being disruptive. I think we have a lot of things to think about and reflect for the report. So I think we're approaching to the close. I'm gonna leave the floor to Heriberto and Grace in case they want to do some closing remarks.
Carolina, it will be Faiza from UNDP who will also be giving closing remarks as well. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So Heriberto and then Faiza.
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you, colleagues, for the very rich discussion. We have been taking notes, and we will be reflecting on this. This is the start of the process. We will try to open other instances of collaboration. There are processes of peer review later on, and so we will be consulting with you, and we will try to establish a mechanism so you can follow the process. I want to also alert you that we're going to be launching a special report on human security early next year. Some of the topics that have been discussed today are going to be in that report, so hopefully that also will help us to take the conversation forward, because there will be an effort of outreach around that report as well. So we are over time, so just to thank you, to all of you, and to thank the South-South Cooperation Office for the support. So looking forward to the next step.
Thanks, Heriberto. Faiza, you can go ahead.
Thank you, colleagues. For those who don't know me, I'm Faiza Effendi. I'm the chief and the director of the effectiveness group in UNDP, and who also holds the portfolio of South-South cooperation and taking that forward. I had the privilege of listening over the last 45 minutes or so to some of the colleagues, and so it is a big thank you to all those who have participated and for their active engagement throughout this consultation. I would like to in particular thank our distinguished speakers and panelists for the insightful presentations and discussions, as well as to the organizers for bringing the voices from the Global South to the session. Now, just some brief reflections benefiting from the discussion that I just heard, the presentations that I had just heard. In a context of the uncertain times and unsettled lives, which is the title of this discussion, we have heard from our speakers today that there are some critical drivers that are intensifying the pace of and necessity for South-South cooperation. Number one, what we have heard is that in today's development challenges, which are dynamic and interconnected, it does require collective action, which are multi-stakeholder, multilateral, and multi-directional. So as UNDP looks to the future of development, we find that such partnerships and such solutions do require co-creation and co-investments in global public goods. And it cannot be a one-way transfer of resources. And as you see, UNDP Strategic Plan 2022 to 2025 prioritizes South-South and triangular cooperation as an integral to how we work and think about the future of development. Second, in the context of the ongoing global pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, and many of the speakers have spoken precisely to that. The spirit of global solidarity has been evidenced through South-South exchanges on fighting the pandemic. This has given impetus to South-South global thinkers to leapfrog the knowledge base on South-South cooperation, lead innovative thinking for influencing decision makers, to prioritize, for example, what we have heard, democratizing technologies for overcoming the digital divide. creating a level playing field for actors of transformation, improving metrics, prioritizing climate change adaptation, and also, diving deeper into the softer aspects of building capabilities of learning to learn. And this is just a few examples of what, I understand and what I have heard today, policymakers and global thinkers are prioritizing. Just a quick recap that the South-South Global Thinkers Initiative, which is a global coalition of think tank networks for South-South cooperation since 2017, has been co-hosted by UNDP and OSSC. I'm sure this must have been mentioned also at the beginning of this discussion. And working and supporting the Southern think tanks and knowledge networks does offer a unique opportunity to leverage analysis, research, and knowledge from these institutions to inform global policy agenda. To conclude, from UNDP, we hope to see this consultation as an opportunity to bring forth the vision expressed in the BAPA Plus 40 and the high-level conference decisions for strengthening the roles of Southern think tanks to influence and balance the focus of development priorities, as well as inspire national and regional analysis. Collaboration with the Human Development Report Office of UNDP is a useful entry point for Southern think tanks as a sounding board to promote constructive policy dialogues, influence policy priorities, and hopefully expand policy choices. I would like to thank you once again for your strategic and thoughtful contributions.
Thank you so much, Faisa. So I think this concludes the conversation, unless Grace, you want to say something else?
No, thank you very much. Thank you all.
Perfect, thank you all and have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye, thank you.
For your contributions.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. A lot to learn from you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Professor Lin, for staying so late.
Thank you. Very
Yeah,
good conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Grace. Thank you. Thank you, Shams.
Thank you, Dr. Sayoba.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Adel.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye, Adele.
Bye.